So this is what we're going to be looking at today is our reflections on paper one. And what we're going to be doing. So, first of all, we're going to look at the positives. What was really good in the paper? What did the students, the candidates do particularly well? Where are the areas of strength that have come through as a kind of pattern from centres? So that we can all build on those strengths and see what we're all doing really well. Because it's really important to do that as well, not just focus on what went wrong in the exams, but also what went really well and what are centres doing particularly well at this moment in time. We're then going to look at common errors, and you can see the types of common errors there. So I'll not go into them too yet. I don't want to spoil my own thunder and go through them, but we're going to go through what were the trends that we saw in the paper in terms of what candidates sort of continually we were seeing from candidates, patterns of things that they were doing wrong. Going to go through some other things. So we're going to look at questions that they misread and why they misread those questions. Going to go through areas of the specification where candidates showed particularly weak knowledge of the specification so that you as centres can then focus on those areas to try and improve it. And then we are going to focus on exam technique. And in particular, I'm going to look at the discuss question from paper one. Because of the type of question that it was. It wasn't as straightforward as some candidates tried to make it, unfortunately. So therefore, I'm going to focus on that. I will say now that obviously we would want to focus on the 9-mark justify question, the 12-mark evaluation question, but I'm going to cover those in more detail as we go through the year. So I'm going to touch on them today, but I won't be doing a big section on those particular question types today. We'll focus on them in upcoming webinars throughout the next sort of 8, 9, 10 months, however many we're going up until April, I think we are. So every month until April. So I will touch on them today, but we'll cover the 9 and 12-mark questions in more detail on their own as we go throughout the year. But please, if you have any questions on them, fire them through the chat. We'll answer them at the end. Absolutely. Okay, so let's look at what the positives were from last summer's paper one. So, and this actually goes for paper one and paper two. We had an uplift last, so summer exam series 2023. We had an uplift in the number of candidates who were completing the paper, and we saw far fewer incidents of 7E not being complete and so on. Again, we saw even more of an increase in that this year. I think that the primary reason for that, obviously last year we got the extra 15 minutes, which helped last year, but this year I think, and we'll come on to that, and one of the major positives, particularly in paper two as well as in paper one, is that actually I think candidates are so well drilled in section A that they are completing that a lot quicker. And that's giving more time for candidates to attempt the longer written questions. There was a lot of candidates who were writing more as well and had time to go on to extra paper. So time didn't seem to be as much of an issue. Obviously, there's always going to be some. But this particular paper, there was far fewer incidents of where the paper was incomplete and the candidate had stopped mid-sentence. Whereas 2-3 years ago, we were seeing that quite a lot. Couple that together with, because people are completing the paper, we're seeing much more detail in the longer questions, as I just alluded to. 7D, 7E, where sometimes we see a change in handwriting because it starts to become really rushed. Actually, we saw a lot of detail, and actually 7E was really well answered. It was quite an accessible question. And people did do quite well on that particular question. The average mark was up. Now, I've put this in the positives, and you might be sitting there thinking, well, the average mark being up wasn't a good thing for my candidates because the grade boundaries were high. But actually, it just shows that actually we're being effective, or you are being particularly effective and centres are being effective in the way that they are teaching exam skills and teaching the specification, because students are getting it and they are performing well in the exams, and the average mark was up by 4 marks from last year, which is, in a 90-mark paper, is quite a large jump. So that's a pat on the back for you guys, really, just in terms of the way that you have prepared your candidates. Business calculations. I'm very careful to say business calculation questions, not all calculation questions, as we'll see in a moment. But business calculations, students did very well, and so it was clear that students had revised well and had been taught well anything that has a business context. So in this particular series, it was total cost, margin of safety. Those questions were particularly well answered. Very few students getting them wrong. Lots of understanding of the formula and demonstrating of it, even though you don't need to in those 2 mark questions. But that was done particularly well. So but I'm not going to, the caveat there is not all calculation questions, as we'll see in a moment. Okay, so they were the real positives from the paper. Let's look at some of the common errors. Now, at this point, I am just going to apologize if I start sniffing. I'm full of a dreaded cold. I won't call it man flu, but I am full of cold at the minute. So it's probably a good thing that you're all behind a computer screen and we're not face to face in a room somewhere. So apologize if I do just quickly mute and sniff for a second. Let's look at this first one. The first error, and this goes for paper 1 and paper 2, but particularly I want to highlight it with paper 1, is that there's a growing trend amongst candidates to be very vague in their development points. Now, what it smacks of is that candidates know they have to put connectives in to develop link to in order to have link strands that develop from the point that they've made. And they think they try and bluff their way to 3 marks. So, for instance, in this particular question, you can see here, explain one disadvantage of starting a business as a partnership. Now, I've just picked on this particular question. Now, all of these answers you see are real answers. They're all in my sort of teenage style handwriting that I have to try and make it clearer for you, because they're not always that legible. But these are all real student answers. Everything that you see is real student answers that we've picked out. So, in this particular question, looking at the sort of vague, what I mean by vague development is this. If you look through this particular question, anybody who maybe isn't as experienced may award this more marks than it is worth. We do start off in this particular question with a valid disadvantage. So one disadvantage is there might be disagreements between partners. Okay, that is specific to partnerships. I'm happy with that as a valid point. It's a valid disadvantage. So I'm already got one finger in the air out of my 3 to award 1 mark. We've got the word therefore. Now, one key thing I want to get across to anybody who's new and maybe isn't experienced in teaching this particular specification, in all written questions, using clear connectives to help develop a point makes it so much easier for an examiner to read and to be able to show, yeah, they are definitely trying to develop their point. As long as what they say after the connective is relevant, then we can start award some marks. So using clear connectives like therefore, this means that, this leads to, as a result, as a consequence, this that type of language is really, really good to show clear link strands. So, and we're seeing more and more of that. I have to say that is a real positive as well. Is the skill of analysis has got much better over the years, and in particular this year I have to say, I thought kids and candidates are getting a real strength in how to articulate themselves in terms of developing the point that they make. So that skill area is a massive plus. Some of the others, as we'll see later on today, not so great at, but the skill of analysis, I have to say, is probably the strongest skill that they show on top of the knowledge. However, this particular candidate probably didn't really know what to say, but knew they had to put a couple of link strands in to get the 2nd and 3rd mark. So have kind of put together this vague development in the hope that an examiner reads it and go, yeah, they've got a point and then 2 link strands, but they don't really say anything. So they say that there might be disagreements between partners. Therefore, the business will be less successful. But why? Therefore, they'll get less money. Now, try and avoid that word money anyway, but it's just all too vague. It's just all too vague. They'll be less successful. What does that, what do we mean by less successful? What do they mean, therefore, they'll get less money? Okay, it's not really developing that particular point very well at all. So that's going to limit that particular response to 1 mark. Linked together with that sort of vague development point is the kind of overlap is the second common error that I want to highlight, which is where we're not seeing explicit knowledge. And now I feel this has always been part of the GCSE in terms of our standards of marking, but it's becoming particularly more apparent now that they can form an answer, and they know how to. In the past, these answers would have been really short, and they wouldn't have known how to analyze and put link strands in. What we're getting is, like in the previous response I've just shown you to the different question, is we're getting some sort of link strand, but it's kind of just trying to blag their way because they're not quite sure of the knowledge. So they're trying to skirt round the point and hope that they get given the marks, but they can't quite remember the specifics to do with the topic that's being examined in the question. And remember, with 3 mark explain questions, it's all AO1A and AO1B. It's all about knowledge and understanding. So we have to demonstrate that we understand. In this particular example you can see on the screen, we have to demonstrate that we understand what a franchise is, and that the examiner's going, yep, they really understand what a franchise is, and therefore are demonstrating that understanding and that knowledge. So if we look at this particular example, this candidate said one advantage is they might sell more products. Well, strictly speaking, that is true, but I'm not really showing that explicit knowledge of what a franchise is as yet. And I'm hoping that something will come in development that'll say why opening as a franchise might help them to sell more products. But they don't. This particular candidate said, therefore, they'll make more revenue and potentially increase profits. Am I getting any real understanding of what a franchise is? Or are they just saying, oh, this could be explain one advantage of business growth? The answer would fit still with that. So there's no specific understanding being shown there. And that's really going to limit them in terms of marks that they get. What we need is something that's a bit more explicit. So for this particular question, I would be hoping to see something like one advantage is they might sell more products. This is because they're licensed to sell, or they a product that's already recognized by customers. Therefore, they'll make more revenue. So, or there's something that shows that they understand what a franchise is. Okay, the third common error that I want to pick up on. Sorry, here's another example about not showing explicit knowledge and what I was trying to talk about. So this particular question, explain. Sorry, this is my fault, my error in here. Please ignore the question at the top of this example. I've just realized I'm going to draw on this. Um, I'm just going to put a line through this particular. My fault, I hadn't spotted that until now. That's not the question. The question is still the previous one. So it's still about this is an example of somebody showing explicit knowledge. So it's the same question as the previous slide. So explain one advantage of opening up a business as a franchise. So one advantage is that they might sell more products. This is because there will be okay. So in my head, I'm thinking that might be right, as I did with the previous response, but I need to see something more. I want to see that explicit knowledge being shown. This is because they will be selling the products of an already established brand. Bingo. Okay, so now I've got 2 fingers in the air because I've got a valid advantage, which is validated that they understand what a franchise is with their second sentence. This is because they will be selling the products of an already established brand. Therefore, chances of failure will be reduced. If this candidate had actually stopped there at this particular word here, Abby, I've just seen your question, and it is pertinent to answer that particular question now. No, I wouldn't have done, to be honest, because there's nothing explicitly showing me anything about franchises in that particular response. Therefore, chances of failure will be reduced. Have I got a point with 2 link strands of logical development? Yes. Do they understand franchise? Yes. However, we have got extra material in here. What's happened? My screen's gone funny. There we go. I'm back. As the franchise will already have customers that are familiar with the business. So I've actually what I've got is I've got a third link strand, which I don't need, but that's fine. This is definite 3 out of 3 response. So hopefully I've shown you there the difference between not showing explicit knowledge and then showing explicit knowledge in this particular other response. And that's really what you need to be training your students to do and getting them and be harsh with them when they're answering questions for homework or in tests in school. Get them used to the fact that they need to show that explicit understanding. And that goes for paper 1 and paper 2. It happened in paper 2 quite a lot as well. As mentioned or alluded to this when I went through the positives, not all of the calculation questions were particularly well answered. A lot of candidates showed poor numerical skills in the questions, in the calculation questions that were not specifically linked to a business formula. So this particular one was just asking them to calculate the average number of trainers customized per month. Okay, and this was really badly answered. So anybody who's new to this particular course, I just wanted to remind you of taking a screenshot from the specification to show you the sort of business questions, quantitative questions and skills that might come up. So particularly, obviously, these ones are all related to business concepts, and there are the formulas for them. But these ones here, there are always questions on these. And in this particular paper, it was the average question, and it was particularly badly answered. Don't just assume that candidates, they think, oh, that's a maths problem. They should be able to calculate averages, percentages, and percentage changes. I actually tend to find that a lot of them, but who, particularly if they don't like maths, are particularly poor at this, showing this particular skill. So make sure you're practicing this with them and just giving them some to do regularly, so they get into the habit of calculating percentages, calculating percentage changes, calculating averages, because there will be questions, although it'll be linked to a business context. It is just a general quantitative skill that is going to be examined. So make sure you're practicing those as well as practicing the margin of safety and calculating profit and calculating break even, etc. Because those other ones, the margin of safety particular question and the other calculation question, the total cost question, were particularly well answered in this particular paper. So they had been practiced. Maybe at the forgetting about or students didn't really know how to calculate the average. I mean, obviously some could, but comparatively, this particular calculation question was much more poorly answered than the ones to do with margin of safety and total cost. So make sure we're practicing those. Okay. And this is where the specification is useful. It tells you what they might be examined on. Next common error was a lack of application. So I talked about how the skill of analysis was particularly good, and it was. The skill of analysis is good in particularly all questions. The skill of application, despite us putting out, and I know some of you have attended webinars where I've looked particularly at applications solely, and I know in the examiners reports they talk about application. For anybody who hasn't read the examiners reports, please do read them. They are fantastic learning aids for us, and use them with the students as well. Point your students towards or show them it. So if you don't want to go through it and don't want to use bits, it's great to use bits from it, because you've got examples of questions in there with with Martin's comments for paper 1 and Jonathan's comments from paper 2 on why marks are awarded. So it's a fantastic learning aid for us as practicing teachers in the subject, but also for students who want to learn how to answer exam questions. It's vital. It's great piece, and they're huge. I look at other subjects and they don't get quite as much detail as they do. And I think these examiners reports were like 70 odd pages each. So there's a lot of effort gone into from Martin and Jonathan, and it's great that that's resources available for us to use. So please use that. And they talk about application in there and how it isn't. And they give you some examples of good application as well, which you can use. But I'm going to give you some here as well. Okay, so application, this is where we need to make it specific to the particular business in the case study. Now, again, the amount of application is really dependent on the question type. If we've got a points-based question, so these are your 1 or 2 mark questions, which tend to be the outline questions, of which there are 3 in each paper, which are worth 2 marks, or your state question, which is worth 1 mark. They need to just have a word of application or a word of context somewhere in the response. Now, you can do lots of practice with students, and I do it all the time. Is I give them an answer with no application in, and I just get them to change it. And often not often, in outline questions, in state questions, that can be 1 word that we change. Okay, so let's look at this question. So this was question 4A on the paper. Outline 1 possible risk to Keelan from setting up ADICOGs. So let's look at the first one on the top left. So just to remind ourselves, an outline question, to get the 2 marks, they need to do 3 things. They need to give a valid point, which in this case is a possible risk. They need to have a linked strand of logical development, and they need to have evidence of application somewhere in the response in order to get the 2 marks in total. So let's look at this one top left. So 1 possible risk is business failure. Is that a possible risk from setting up ADICOGs? Yes, it is. So I would call that a valid point. Okay, so I'm happy with that. This could be due to a lack of customers as the business has just started. Got a point of development. Have I got any application? No. That could be about any particular business. So because even though we've got a point and a linked strand of development, that's going to get 1 mark. And that is very, very typical of the type of answer that we would see. I would suggest the majority of students are gaining 1 mark. They can, because you don't have to do too much to get 1 mark. You just have to give a possible risk. Okay, but if you forget to do a link strand or if you forget to put application in, you're not getting that 2nd mark. Let's look at this second one. This is quite often typical of what we saw. 1 possible risk to Keelan is business failure. There's the valid point. This could be due to a lack of customers as the business has just started. Okay, so I just rewrote the same answer that I got that I picked out. But this time I put Keelan's name in it. And a lot of students will go, well, I've written Keelan's name in. That's application. Now, it would count as application if his name wasn't in the question. Okay, because his name is in the question, that cannot count as application. So that's why the same as why ADICOGs is in the question, that cannot count as application. Sometimes they'll make the question slightly harder by putting the type of product in there. If they've mentioned trainers in that question, we wouldn't be able to use that. Okay, so whatever's in the question, we can't use or won't count as application at all, whether it's points-based or level-based question. Okay, so again, this one only gets 1 mark. How do we get 2 marks using that same line of argument? So 1 possible risk to Keelan is business failure. There's our valid point again. This could be due to a lack of customers willing to get their trainers customized. Right, now I've got something that's specific about the business. I've got some development. Why is it going to fail? Well, it's going to fail because there's a lack of customers who will pay to get the trainers customized. Trainers customized makes it specific to ADICOGs. I've got the point. I've got the link strand of development. I've got the contextualization. So I've hit that application tick box as well. Now I can award the 2 marks because I've got the 3 components that are needed. So I wanted to pick one where I showed you the 3 different examples of it. So you can see how it's the same answer, but how you just need to change it slightly in order to get that extra mark. Okay. And how using the key thing is not using anything from the question as part of the, in order to get application. I hope that makes sense. Okay, how are we doing? We're 5:30. Right. I want to look at the next question, which was analyze the importance to ADCOGs of identifying customer needs. So this is the 6 mark. So this is a levels-based question. Now, in the levels-based question, in a 6 mark analyze question, that if you just to remind those, and I know I'm teaching some of you to psychology and you know this, but we're judging the response against 2 different assessment criteria. So the first one is your application, or AO2. And simply put, we're looking at how well they've contextualized their response. And we're going to give it level 0 if there's absolutely nothing. Level 1 would be sort of 1, although we in terms of application, we don't assign a number. We don't say you need 5 bits of application to get level 3. That's not how it is. Okay, so get that out of your mind. Any questions about how many times do they need to put application into their answer? Because the reason we don't say that is they could put loads of application in the first 2 lines and then have nothing for the rest of the answer, and then it wouldn't fit the marking scheme, the mark scheme criteria, which says that it has to be throughout. So we're looking for this application to be throughout. It needs to be, if they're answering it, because you can answer an analyze question in 2 ways. You can have 1 paragraph with 5 links, or 2 separate paragraphs with 5 links between those 2 particular paragraphs. If you've gone down the 2-paragraph route, which a lot of candidates do because they find it easier, then they need to ensure that there's application in both. If there's only application in one of the paragraphs, that's not going to be throughout, so therefore it won't get anything. Okay. In terms of our app analysis, which was good, the analysis is always the strongest of the assessment criteria. As I've mentioned, you need 5 link strands across 1 or 2 points to get level 3 for analysis, AO3A, which is the second of the criteria that we are judging in analyze questions. Bearing in mind that the point that they make is not a linked strand of development, so don't be careful not to include that as part of your 5. But anyway, I'm not focusing on the whole question. I'm focusing on the skill of application because that's what the sort of common trend was from students. So let's look at a paragraph that somebody wrote to this in an answer to this particular question. So the question is, analyze the importance to ADCOGs of identifying customer needs. They said, it is important to identify customer needs, to identify what price they would be willing to pay for the trainers. Okay, so I've got a valid point there, and therefore I have got the word trainers. So I've got 1 bit of application in there. Therefore, the owners would know if they could make a profit from charging the price they want to. Is that development? I would say so. So I'm happy. I've got 1 linked strand of development there. Is there any application in there? No. If the price that customers are willing to pay is too low, the owners will have to decide if they can cut costs somewhere or whether they need to do something else. Okay, I've got a second link strand of development. Have I got any more application? No. So I've got 1 little bit of application. So in terms of this paragraph, I'm looking, if I was assessing this alone as the answer, I would have level 1 only for application because I've only got 1 instance of it. I would need more than that for level 2 and more for, obviously, again, for level 3. Let's look at a second paragraph. It is also important because the owners can find out what customers want from the product. Okay, that's valid. That is a valid reason why identifying customer needs is important. Therefore, they can sell what customers want. Okay, I'm happy with that as some development. Therefore, they have a better chance of attracting customers, leading to a better chance of being profitable. Okay, so where this whole answer would get across the 2. So I've got 2-paragraph approach. You can see from my annotations that I've got 3 link strands of development in the second paragraph, 2 in the first. So in terms of our AO3A, the analysis, this one is going to get level 3. I've hit that magic number of 5 link strands. In terms of my application, however, which is the AO2, I've only got that 1 instance where they've just said the word trainer. Now, in terms of what mark this would get, there could be a difference in opinion. Some people would give it 4 because you've got level 1 and level 3. Some people would give it 3 because the application is particularly weak, or they've only just got into level 3 for A or 3A. Both of those I'd be happy with. There's not a definitive answer that says this is definitely a 4 or this is definitely a 3. Personally, I would award it 4. Okay, I'd go from the starting point of adding the two levels together and then decide, do I need to adjust that because of the quality of the answer? Now, so some of you might be sat there saying, can't give it 3, can't give it 4, it's got to be a 3. That's fine. We're in the right ballpark. It's a level-based response. We're never going to get everybody to agree. As long as we are giving that right level, then that is fine. Okay. And that's where you will see some differences. The points-based ones are different. Okay. There's no ambiguity there. Level-based ones, you're going to get that little bit of ambiguity in the level-based answers. So somebody might think that's a 3, somebody might think that's a 4. It's a level 2 response. Overall, we're both right. We've given 3 and 4. I'm happy either way. Okay. So this is the type of answer we were getting, showing that the analysis really strong, application particularly weak. So let's have a look at one that has got some application in just to show you how we could have used it. Okay. Now, what I've done, and this is quite often what I do, so this was the actual answer that we got from the students. What I've done is rewritten that, putting application in, and this is a task. If some of you have attended the webinars over the past few years, know that I use this activity quite a lot, and I get students who have not used any context in, and I give them out to everybody, and I say, right, let's change this answer, putting application in to get us up to full marks. So it's a great activity to do. And you can change certain words. Then you can highlight things like, for instance, in this, if we look at this again, so it is important to identify what price customers would be willing to pay for the trainers to be cleaned or customized. Valid point. We've now got the trainers to be cleaned or customized. Bit more specific than just saying trainers, because this is what they're particularly doing. In the previous one, we said, therefore, the owners would know if they could make a profit from charging the price they want to. In this one, if we rewrite it, therefore, Keelan would know if his trainer business could make a profit from charging £200 for the new customized trainers and £20 from his deep clean service. Okay, so I've got more development there. Same development. Now I've got loads of context. Now I'm going to highlight Keelan as context in this particular response. And a lot of you are probably shouting at the screen going, but you said Keelan in the last question wasn't application. And you'd be absolutely right. In the last question I showed you, which was this question, outline one possible risk to Keelan from setting up Adicogs. Keelan wouldn't count as application because Keelan's name is in the question. In this question, his name is not in the question. So therefore, it counts this time towards application. So I've got Keelan's name. I've got the fact that they charge us £200 for new customized trainers and £20 from his deep clean service. So I've got application. If the price is much lower than his £200 or the £20, then Keelan will have to decide if they can cut costs somewhere else or if he needs to offer a different service. Again, we're using that application. Now we can repeat application as long as we're not using the same one all the way through. If we use the same, so if I just use Keelan's name all the way through this particular response, or the word trainer all the way through this response, and I had nothing else, then that would get a maximum of level 2 for application. To get level 3, you have to have a variety. And it has to be throughout. Now, those of you who've done the webinars before have seen my way of marking. I do like to highlight in boxes where the application is because you can very quickly see pictorially if they've used it throughout the paragraph. Now, we don't need it in every single line that they've written, but is this throughout? Yes, it is. Then we've got the second paragraph. It's also important because Keelan can find out what the popular football teams and brands are to base his customization on. Okay, so I've got a valid point. Rather than being generic and just saying what products or what they want from the product, we're now saying what the popular football teams and brands are to base his customization on. Okay? Contextualized. Therefore, he can choose football teams and bands that have lots of fans. There's our development. Therefore, the trainer business, this is the type of thing we see, it's fine, have a better chance of attracting customers. So Keelan has a better chance of his footwear business making profit. Fine. Again, very quickly see pictorially, I've got context throughout this particular paragraph. This now scores level 3 for AO2, level 3 for AO3A, and is going to get 6 out of 6. So it's a really good activity to use to get them to put in, and even just changing the word, showing them you change the word owner to Keelan, because Keelan is not in the question, it can be used. Okay, so therefore this scores 6 out of 6. Okay. Misreading of question. I've got 10 minutes or so before we get into questions, so I need to speed up a little bit. Just be careful of some questions that students misread. One of the ones that they misread quite a lot on was this particular question. So explain one advantage to customers from increased competition. Now, the key word in this particular question is the word customers, because it's asking what's the advantage to the customer from increased competition. A lot of students gave a response to a business from increased competition, which isn't the question. They think they just get into the mindset, and a lot of times they will do that. Particularly in paper 2, they might start talking about but in terms of how you're going to motivate the employee, what's the benefit to the employee of being or of training, okay, or something like that. So that's not from the benefit to the business; it's the benefit to the individual. In this case, it was the advantage to customers. And let's just have a look at an example. One advantage to customers from increased competition being able to purchase better products. Well, is that from the customers or is that from the business? It's from the customers. So therefore, that is a valid answer. This means that due to competition, businesses will try to make their products to satisfy customers and fulfill customers' needs, leading to satisfied customers and a good brand image. Okay, so when we start talking about the good brand image and the fact that we're going to make more profit and get a better reputation out of it, that's going down. That's the benefit to the business, not the benefit to the customer. So we need to make sure that we're sticking to what it is that is being asked in the question. And that's just candidates rushing through thinking they're seeing something else. Weak knowledge, I'll very quickly touch on this. There were 3 particular areas that were questions that were particularly weak. Retained profit. So many candidates said that one disadvantage from using retained profit is that the business will end up with less sales. I just don't know where that's come from. It's obviously coming from them going, oh, I need to put something down. What can I think of? I'll try and put something to try and blag some marks, but they don't really have any understanding of what retained profit is. So sources of finance is notoriously bad amongst candidates. So please pay particular attention when you're looking at that particular area of the specification. The unemployment question was particularly badly done as well. There was lots of misconception amongst students. So they had to explain one disadvantage to a small business from an increase in unemployment. A lot of people confused it with not having enough employees. And every time we ask a question on unemployment, that seems to be what a lot of students pick up on, is they confuse it with having not enough employees. And obviously that's incorrect. Going back to our sources of finance, overdrafts. The candidates who picked option 2 in this justify question, in this 9-mark question, did better. Now, and I said to you, I'll very quickly touch on 9-mark questions. I'm conscious of the time, and we will and often have spent a whole hour talking about 9-mark questions, because there's still a lot of misinformation out there. What I suggest you do with 9-mark question, if you've got any misunderstandings or you're not sure how best to approach it, read the examiner's report on these 2 questions, because they say exactly the same as I've been saying in my webinars for the past 3 years. There are multiple ways you can answer this question. The easiest way for a 15, 16-year-old student is to pick one option, do a paragraph on the advantage of that option, a paragraph on the disadvantage, the drawback of that same option, and then a conclusion. You can get 9 marks without even mentioning the second option. Okay. So make sure that, um, but there are other ways of doing it. Okay. That is the way. And if you read Jonathan and Martin's reports on paper one and paper two, they say exactly the same thing. Okay. So we will touch on the on 9 mark questions later on in the year. But please, if you're unsure, there's a lot of clearly from reading it, there is some misinterpretation out there amongst teaching staff because we see it in the way that the kids answer the question. We see a lot of advantage of option one, advantage of option two. Now you can get evaluation from that, but you have to compare the relative strengths of those advantages, which is a lot harder to do. Okay, so read. My best advice for 9 mark questions: go back over the 9 mark webinars when we've done them. We did some last year. I think they're all available on the EdXL website. I'm sure Peter will be able to tell us if that's not the case. Read Jonathan's exam report. Read Martin's exam report. Examiner's report for paper one. They're very clear in their advice as to what we need to do for 9 mark justified questions, and they'll say exactly the same as what I've just told you. Okay. Quarter two. So I'm not, we could spend a whole hour and more talking about justified questions, and we will cover them in more detail in subsequent webinars. I want to focus on the last bit before we get to the Q&A, is I want to focus on discussed questions for two reasons. One, we don't often talk about them because they're such a small part. There's only one of them in each paper, so they're only worth 6 marks. But those 6 marks could be particularly important. But also because in this particular paper, in paper one, the discussed question wasn't as straightforward as sometimes they always are, because it's a discuss the method question, not a discuss the benefit or drawback question. The 6 mark question in paper two, which was about discuss the benefit of being environmentally friendly, much better answered than the discuss question in paper one, which was discuss the way a small business could use branding to add value. What we have to be very mindful of, and the clue as to what I'm going to say is at the top of the slide there, is that we're not talking about the benefit of branding to a business. As soon as we start talking about, therefore, increasing sales and increasing profits, we're not answering the question. The question is about how does a business use branding to add value, not what is the benefit of using branding. And it's a subtle difference that students sometimes find hard. Now, normally you see this as a 3 mark explain question. It'll say, explain the method a business will use, or explain the way a business will use. And it's how the development has to be, how do they use whatever it is that they're asking to get to the point that they want to? So in this case, how do they use branding to add value, not what is the benefit, the generic benefit of having a branded product or using branding. Okay, right. Let's look at what I mean. So let's look at this example. So one way is that it can create customer loyalty. Is that a way branding can add value? Potentially, potentially. Therefore, they can charge a high price. Okay. Yeah, now they know what they're talking about. They're talking about added value. And some of you might go, well, that's a benefit. Well, yes, it is, but it is saying it's showing their understanding of what adding value is. It's saying how does branding lead to adding value, which essentially is charging a higher price. Any question about added value, my top tip is get your candidates, get your students to start talking about higher prices. It leads to them being able to charge higher prices because that's what the examiners are wanting to see. This allows the business to increase its revenue. Now I'm getting into, I've stopped explaining how, and I'm now explaining the benefit of having branding and increasing the revenue. Therefore, profit may increase as a result. It's all about the benefit. If the business retained this profit, they could reinvest it to develop more products, therefore allowing the business to reach a wider market, therefore sales increase, potentially to increase profits. Now, if you just weren't really concentrating on what you were doing, at first glance, people might think that's a really brilliant answer. There's lots of linked strands of development. Remember, with a discuss question, you can answer it in one of two ways. One paragraph with 5 linked strands, or 2 paragraphs with 5 linked strands across the two points that you've made. on the face of it, people might go, there's loads of link strands in that. There's loads of connectives. This allows the business. Therefore, this could, therefore alone, therefore they've used it all the way through, leading to. So there's loads of link strands, but the link strands are not. And so we've moved away from the question. We're now explaining the benefit of branding rather than explaining how branding leads to added value. So let's look at a different answer. So we've got one here, which is a different candidate's answer. So a business may use branding to differentiate its products from its competitors. Could that be why they use branding to add value? Yes. Therefore, giving it a unique selling point. This is still all explaining how it leads to adding value because their business is instantly recognizable through the branding. Good. Instantly recognizable, like that bit. This makes the product or service they are selling more price inelastic. This must be somebody. I mean, we don't get kids writing like this normally. This must be somebody who does GCSE economics. This makes the product or service they are selling more price inelastic to, even though it's not on our specification, we can still award it as linked strands because it's relevant. Makes the product they're selling more price inelastic to demand. Okay. Which means that the business is able to increase the price without a significant fall in demand. Good development. Hence adding value. Now, I'm not going to award this as a linked strand because this is just taken straight from the question, assuming variable costs are kept the same. So you can see how the point is they're saying how branding ends up in adding value. So that should the adding value bit should be the end of the paragraph. And the link strands are how do we get from how does branding lead to having added value? I'm not starting to talk about the advantage of having added value. We're going to receive more money for each particular product. Therefore, we're going to have more revenue. Therefore, we potentially might make more profit, which we can then reinvest and do something else with it. A business may also use branding to make the product seem a luxury. Okay, that's also true. Through premium branding, such as the one of Gucci, I think that is, which may make products or services seem more exclusive, which means that the business can increase the price add value. Okay, so we've got another paragraph in the same, even though actually I'm nearly there anyway. I've got 4 link strands in this particular paragraph, loads of have they got good knowledge? Absolutely. I've got some more link strands in this paragraph, more than I need. So therefore, this is without a doubt getting a 6 out of 6. Okay. Again, they've said why branding leads to adding value. And that's what you want to be seeing in these particular explain the method or explain how questions. Okay. Don't be awarding what the consequences are of adding value, which means that they get more revenue and therefore more profit. If this was benefit of adding value, then this paragraph is great, but it's not what the question is asking. So therefore, that's really going to limit. This would get this would be a level 1 response, whereas the second one is clearly a level 3 response. Okay. Excellent. So I'm just going to stop sharing, although I do just want to highlight other things there. I'm sure Peter might be able to talk more about these as more of his area of expertise towards the end. There is, if you ever unsure, we do have subject advisors. Colin is our subject advisor, is normally here. Unfortunately, he's on annual leave at the minute, but Colin is fantastic. And a lot of you will have had interaction with Colin Leith. Please do get in touch with him if you do have any queries or concerns and about the content of the specification and the subject, and he will do his best to answer the questions as such. And I think Peter, I don't know if you want me to keep these slides on or whether I can stop sharing and answer any of the questions in the final 7 minutes.
Yeah, I think if you want to put it onto the logo screen or wherever you feel fit, Paul, and I can share a few questions to you directly to address.
Okay, there we go. Let's go there, shall we?